Hello guys, I've been doing a bunch of research into the 2023 Can-Am ATV models. They're finally starting to hit showrooms and I'm trying to get my hands on one. Um, it's still kind of hard to get the models you want. A lot of shops aren't getting really good allocations yet, but they're starting to trickle in, so I'm trying to get one. So I'm digging into the parts diagrams because that's where I always figure out how these things actually work. And what I've discovered is that the um, new Outlanders, the 500 and the 700 models, are heavily related to the side-by-sides that have been out for a few years, like the Commander 700. So if you look here between these two pictures, you can see that the transmission units look identical. And if you start looking through the part numbers, you can see that there are some differences. So my number one concern whenever I'm buying a vehicle like this is always gearing. I want to run oversized tires. I don't want to have belt issues. The only way to achieve those two things reliably and together is to have a good low gears. And Can-Am on their latest side-by-sides has been giving you really low gears because they finally realized it saves belts and everyone wants to run mud tires. So it's kind of a good sign that they are throwing an engine and transmission and differentials out of a side-by-side directly into an ATV. That should mean it's pretty robust. And it should mean that we have some low gears. So let's start looking at what they're doing here. So a lot of these gears, like these bevel gears here, that you can see kind of like a brute force setup, um, they don't give you even part numbers. So if you look at 54 down here, there's no part number, there's no ratio, nothing. Same thing with like these counter shaft and input shaft right here. Not a ton of information. We have a part number, so we can see that number 32 is common between a lot of machines, but we can't. What I can't tell you is, what the teeth count is there. So let's look at 32 compared to the Commander over here. It's also number 32. Um, so see, there's a different part number here between the Commander and the Outlander. So what does that mean, right? Why are they using a different input shaft? Uh, Probably because there's a different ratio. So I'm gonna have to get my hands on these machines and actually tear into them to figure out the actual ratios. Can-Am doesn't put the ratios in the owner's manual, which is very annoying. All they have is diff ratio. But what I can tell you is about these two gears up here. So 5 and 6 are listed up here as intermediate gears, and it actually gives you the tooth count. So we can calculate the ratios. Same thing with the 700, and they are different ratios. I'm going to switch over to Excel real quick and show you what I've discovered. So here's some spec comparison right here if you're interested comparing the Rubicon 520 to the 700 DPS. I didn't do the XMR here because the Rubicon's a stock machine on stock tires. You see the prices come out pretty similar once you account for Can-Am's ridiculous destination charge. Um, I digress. So intermediate gear ratios, that's what we were just talking about the transmission. There's three sets that I've come across. The 700 base model ATV Outlander, the XMR 700 and the Pro 700 Outlander, and then the side-by-side that has the same engine and transmission, the HG7 and the Commander. So you can see they all have different teeth counts going across here. And if you calculate those ratios, they all have slightly different ratios. So you can see that for the Pro and the XMR, Can-Am geared it down a little bit, and then it's geared down even further in the HG7. So if you wanted to buy a base model and throw these gears in here, you could get yourself a 10.5% reduction with all OEM Can-Am parts if you wanted to pull the transmission and rebuild it. Likewise, if you wanted to buy the XMR 700 and throw the Commander 700 gears in it, that would only get you about a 4% reduction. And that's calculating the reductions the way that we do it on Hondas. So, very simply just dividing the bigger number by the smaller number. And obviously this should really be times 100 for the actual ratio. But you get the point here. 1.041 times as many crank revolutions per wheel revolutions. So I'm calling that a 4.1% reduction, or in this case, a 10.5% reduction. Pretty simple. So let me show you a few more things when you look at these models that are really similar. So transmission, like we said, between these two is identical. Let's go up and look at the a couple other things. So first thing I noticed that was really similar was the front differential. The front differential between the new side-by-sides and ATVs look very similar on the internals. They mount a little different. Here it is. Let's see if I got the right one over here. Yep. So you see you've got this big shift fork here that does your locker engagement. You've got this basket type thing that it actuates. Um, and just the whole way this thing works with the actuator and stuff. Let's switch over to the Commander and look at it. Ooh, look at that. Very similar, right? We got the same big shift fork, same looking actuator thing, same basket. So if this differential is handling the weight of a Commander with a full locker in the front, that does, bode well for the ATV. Look at the mounts though. So the Commander mounts down here, whereas the ATV mounts more than a traditional bolts going through the frame type ATV type mount. So they've changed the housing, but the internals look very similar. Um, Also, let's check out the engine because it's it's the same engine, which is interesting. That they were able to jam a side-by-side engine into the frame of an ATV. It's almost like they designed this engine with the intention of it going in both. Obviously, this engine hasn't been out that long. It just took them a little bit longer to get the ATV into market. So here's the crankcase. You've got like the belt housing kind of molded in there. Here's a zoomed out version. Um, Belt breather through here, engine slanted rearwards, very compact design, right? Still got you got some roller bearings, but like Can-Ams always have, you have some regular automotive style oil film type bearings, which is why when you sink these Can-Ams, they blow up almost immediately. But if we switch over to the Commander, the side by side, look how similar it is. I mean, it's exactly the same. So there's a lot of commonality between these two machines. One thing I didn't mention earlier that I really should have mentioned that you guys may have seen if you're a nerd like me, there is a reverse chain in both of these. So they went and looked at the worst thing Polaris ever did and said, let's copy that. This chain looks pretty beefy. I haven't heard anyone breaking it. It's probably fine. A reverse chain is the most compact way to add reverse to a gearbox, right? Because this would be your high range, this would be your low range, and then when you switch to this chain, that switches the direction of the output shaft. So it's reverse chains are great for making a compact gearbox, but they're not great for running big mud tires and high horsepower and aggressive clutching. So we'll see how this holds up. Um, Everyone does say this transmission shifts a lot smoother though than the older Can-Am transmission. So that's one thing to point out. Let's go ahead and look at the rear diff and see how similar those look. Oh, clutching. So this new Can-Am does have some pretty badass clutching. Everyone says it's a big improvement. The P drive or whatever. It's all rollers. It's got a pretty interesting looking system here. Very tunable. You got springs on the primary and the secondary. You can change the weight. So and it looks like it's going to be a very good reduction. Big secondary pulley and this front pulley gets down pretty small. So the clutching should be decent. It should be pretty watertight because it's sealed up against an engine instead of just a plastic bolt back plate. It's actually got this engine as the back housing, the back plate to the belt box. So that's cool. Where is the rear differential? I think it's called final gear. Here we go, final drive unit. Let's look at these two and compare them and see if they look similar as well. The reason that's curious is because Can-Ams have traditionally have had issues making reliable rear differentials, as everyone with the Can-Am have found out pretty quickly over the past 10 years. The rear differentials were crap. We were blowing them left and right, and then they finally got it figured out in like the latest XMRs. But that's one thing to point out. This new XMR has hardly anything in common with the old XMR. Like my XMR 1000 Renegades, nothing in common with this new XMR 700. This new XMR 700 is based heavily off of the side-by-sides. So the Commander diff is going to be different because it's got turf mode. I just thought about that. So it's got a locking mechanism and stuff, whereas the ATV is much simpler. There's no differential in here, so I shouldn't even call it a diff. It's more of a rear gearbox. So maybe I shouldn't do the Commander. Um, I don't think they're going to have a non-turf mode 700 now that I think about it. Yeah, that's why this one looks more complicated because you actually have spider gears in here and you have the mechanism to lock it in. So never mind, that comparison isn't very helpful. Sorry about that. But yeah, just some stuff to note. I've also gone through the entire all the manuals for these machines. Not a whole lot to talk about here. If you are interested in more of this stuff, there's a long version of this video on the Patreon page with a bunch more details and stuff like that. But I just wanted to post this one about the gear ratios because it's a question I've been getting a lot. Can you do a gear reduction on these? What size tires think they'll be able to turn? I think because they're running the side-by-side transmission and they're running the side-by-side rear diff ratio, you should be able to turn a 32 with this XMR 700 stock, but we'll find out. One thing that's interesting, if with the Commander, if you get the 1000R, they actually gear it higher to give you some more top speed. But this 3.6 to 1 is the same ratio that you'll find in the XMR 700. So yeah, let me know if you guys find this stuff interesting. If you do, please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon when you subscribe to turn on your notifications. That way, YouTube can tell you like this video and I can make more of them. Thanks.